There we are. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on tackling power asymmetries in youth participation. Thanks so much for joining. This session is organized by the Institute of Development Studies, together with the Africa Security Sector Network, Abel Hutchful. My name is Bashirkha Ostrom. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Development Studies, IDS, and I convene the Youth Research Strategy on Youth Employment Politics and Peace and Security, which is focusing largely on Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. There's a big, long lineup today. You can see all the organizations involved in organizing this panel on the left-hand side and the list of speakers on the right-hand side. And we've organized this session around three rounds of provocations. So each round starts with evidence, research-based provocations by two of our speakers. And then the audience can respond and ask questions via the chat function. And in the last 20 minutes of this session, we will have two breakout groups, and you can join one of the two. And then we will come back in plenary and conclude. So to introduce the topic of this session, it will be no news to you that young people globally continue to have challenges to influence formal governance processes and decision-making processes. And this is despite all the progress that has been made with the UN Security Council Resolution 2250 on peace and security that calls for meaningful participation. And despite also all the funding going into youth interventions, although there appears to be an imbalance in funds going into youth employment, more funds going into youth employment than in participation. And many young women and men express themselves informally in their own informal ways, but this might be in ways sometimes uncomfortable to external actors who expect a nice and decent conversation. So in this panel, we will hear about Zimbabwe, Kenya, Iraq, Tunisia and Palestine. And we really want to push the conversation on how to align, how to listen to these young voices and to recognize these actions. And in the international development, we talk a lot about funding, but this is not going to be just about funding. We also, in the diplomatic community, there's other ways that the actors can align, encourage and support, and especially recognize the voices and actions of young people. So now to kick us off, I want to give the floor to Rosavita Katsanda of the Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust for her opening remarks, and then we will begin the rounds of discussion. Rosavita, you have the floor.
Thank you for the introduction. Just to confirm if you can hear me. Thank you. My name is Rosavita Katsande. I work for Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust, a youth civil society organization based in Zimbabwe that is working on capacity strengthening and advocacy of youth organizations in Zimbabwe. And we are currently carrying out a research on strengthening youth civic engagement with support from IDRC. I'm very pleased to give opening remarks for this dialogue. So maybe to start with, I think you all agree with me that the potential of young people is the driving force for our collective prosperity. Young people account for 1/4 of the world's population. However, despite young people being in the majority, they are largely alienated and marginalized. And this generation of young people that we have face many obstacles ranging from discrimination, marginalization, and lack of access to opportunities and voices in decision-making. In the past decades, we have seen various governments making advances in terms of policy commitments to youth development, both at national level, regional, and even at global level. But such commitments have not always made actions on the ground. So if you look at most countries, especially in Africa, the national youth policies have never gained real traction. There is lack of political will and commitment, and there is a yawning gap between the policy rhetoric and the actual implementation. So you will see that despite there being the youth policies, youth development framework, we are not seeing any implementation on the ground. Some of the reasons that have also been put forward is the lack of resources, weak institutional mechanisms to sustain youth policies and youth programs. So what it means at the end of the day, if these youth programs and policies are not implemented, they remain largely aspirational, and we have seen young people being used as vehicles of violence instead of them being voices of positive change. If you look at the current context that we are in, and also in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, too many young people are still jobless. They struggle to access public resources and quality social services. We've also seen that young people are systematically excluded from political power and economic opportunities in many parts of the world. So this session is going to focus on youth voices and actions in context of insecurity in Africa and the MENA region. And we are also hoping to generate ideas for supporting critical voices and meaningful youth participation, including aid-funded programs and through diplomatic efforts. Youth engagement and involvement is crucial for the achievement or attainment of sustainable development goals. I want to refer to paragraph 15 of the UN 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, which states that the future of humanity lies also in the hands of today's younger generation who pass the torch to future generations. The United Nations Development Programme also cited young people as key partners in the attainment of sustainable development goals, as evidence in the statement that I'm going to read. The goals and targets of the 2030 Agenda are interconnected. Explicitly or implicitly, young people are deeply embedded within their fabric. Their knowledge, rich and innovative solutions are essential if sustainable development is to be realized. So one of the key questions that we need to interrogate is, can the global instruments proposed by Sustainable Development Goal 16, UNSCR 2250 be leveraged to alter this picture and achieve meaningful change at the local level in contexts where political power continues to be exercised through patriarchal and gerontocratic structures? You agree with me that young people must be architects in designing locally driven programs, context-specific programs that increase their agents, promotes their active participation and civil participation so that they can be able to influence decision-making. There is also need for a multi-dimensional youth development policies and programs that integrate: 1, youth participation; 2, providing of economic opportunities for young people; and then 3, integrated youth services starting from the local level. And I think what is also key is also the importance of working collaboratively as stakeholders to then have this multi-dimensional challenges young people are facing, especially looking at those young people who are vulnerable and at risk. So you also appreciate that when you talk of young people, you also have other they are diverse, and we also need to see how we can also reach out to them in their diversity. So at this point in time, I wish us fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rosavita, for kicking us off and underlining the importance of engagement, of substantive engagement. Okay, we're moving swiftly on to the first round of provocations, which is about youth expression. So how do young people perceive the power asymmetries, and how do they express themselves about these? And do external actors, be they foreign governments and aid organizations, but also those working in diplomacy, always understand these expressions correctly? In particular, if they may create a sense of discomfort, and if misunderstood, do they maybe fail to support young people and deepen their marginalizations? So we'll first hear from Tarila Abiede on the End SARS protest, and then we'll hear from Chloe Skinner about youth in Palestine. Tarila, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mayoke. Thank you, dear colleagues, for participating in this meeting. And I will speak about Nigeria's NSAS protest led by young people exactly one year ago. First of all, let me provide you with a background. The NSAS protest was in response to police brutality in Nigeria. This occurred in the context of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, which was established in the early 90s in response to armed robbery in Lagos State. However, this Special Anti-Robbery Squad, in short SAS, became notorious for kidnapping, armed extortion, torture, enforced disappearance, extrajudicial killing, and other forms of brutality, especially against young people. Since 2017, young people have been protesting, complaining about police brutality, especially that carried out by SARS. And this led to a social media campaign with the hashtag #EndSARS. It became a rallying point for young people to mobilize and to speak, to demand for reforms in police, especially law enforcement. However, again, this protest escalated in 2019 and 2020 following attacks carried out by SARS against young people in the southern town of Ughelli in Nigeria's oil-rich Niger Delta. Quickly, this escalated and led to more protests across Nigeria, especially in the southern region. We need to understand that Nigeria is a country of about 200 million people, out of which 160 million people are young, between the ages of 15 and 35. Young people constitute the majority of people in Nigeria, and they are also faced with other forms of challenges, such as high unemployment. And as you see in the figures, that Nigeria accounts for a significant number of people migrating to Europe. However, within the country, there's also issues of rule of law, justice, massive inequality, and overall poverty. People are unable to actualize their potentials. It is in this context that young people are facing the key challenge of police brutality. Again, one way young people find ways of expressing themselves or actualizing their potential is through technology. Again, this way of expression has been criminalized by the state and especially police institutions, where young people who are engaged in any form of technology is seen as criminal, or as you know, with Nigeria, associated with internet fraud. And this has led to attacks and brutality against young people. There is a fundamental difference between Nigeria's young people and its older generation. And this is where the issue of power asymmetry comes to play. Nigeria's young people are linked to a global narrative of change, the global narrative of talent, a global narrative of value creation. And young people in Nigeria, as with other young people in the world, seek to contribute to this, to value through, seeks to contribute to creating value through technology. However, this produces a form of wealth that is not common in Nigeria. The most common form of wealth in Nigeria is derived through patronage politics, and therefore creating a form of wealth that differs from the dominant forms of wealth means creating a form of power that is different from the dominant sources or types of power, because wealth eventually is linked to power. This threatens to disrupt Nigeria's technology and young people's migration, mobility, social mobility of young people through technology, and not through the formal means of patronage in Nigeria, threatens to disrupt power relations in Nigeria. And this is at the issue of NSAS, because young people assume, or young people act on the basis that NSAS threatens their own social, police brutality threatens their social mobility, their economic mobility, and the states suppressing young people, suppressing this protest also seeks to reinforce the existing hierarchies of power in Nigeria. However, following the outbreak of NSAS, we observed, and this is important, that there was no serious support locally, or I would say that the support was unclear, as there was as diplomatic actors in Nigeria who in the past have developed programmatic response to youth issues in Nigeria did not provide direct support to young people. Let's be clear that in the past, diplomatic institutions the embassies, aid agencies, donors have implemented programs targeting youths, different types of programs in Nigeria, from youth employment programs to citizenship, to education, to political participation, to elections. This is a fact. However, the type of programs that will fundamentally restructure or change Nigeria's power structure, which is at the heart of the challenges facing the country, did not receive the kind of support that would have been expected. Globally, international actors like and celebrities such as the former Secretary Hillary Clinton and then presidential candidate, now President Joe Biden, did send solidarity messages on Twitter and called on Nigerian authorities to end police brutality. However, some diplomatic actors on the ground that had the capacity to, or that could have intervened and called on the police to stop this brutality did not act, send a strong message to the Nigerian authorities. And this is my key message in this talk, is that during the protests, Nigerian authorities continue to directly attack young people, including violently suppressing the attacks. There were clear indications that members, for example, members of the United States Congress and other actors were keen to respond to these human rights violations. However, we are unsure about the diplomatic communications that did not bring that did not create the conditions for this to happen. Let's be clear. Today's young people in Nigeria were born into a liberal world. They are quick, for example, to point out that the international community will respond to issues of human rights violations in Nigeria. Hence, the failure of the diplomatic community in Nigeria and globally to provide a strong support for the NSAS movement fits into a growing cynicism among young people. This idea that there is no hope, that the international community will not save you, nothing will happen, and we will kill you. This cynicism and the associated hopelessness further weakens popular movements for change in Nigeria. It also provides an opportunity for illiberal actors to develop a critical mass of support among these young people, especially those with limited education and opportunities. I think that this provides I've come to the end of my talk, and I think we should reflect about this and how to support not just NGOs, but also youth movements that are calling for change in countries such as Nigeria. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tarile, for those very critical reflections on the role of different players. We're moving on immediately to Chloe Skinner. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Marioka. Hi, so I'm Chloe, as Marioka said, and I'm going to be talking today about perceptions and expressions of Palestinian youth. So based on years of research and activism with Palestinian youth, I can testify that for the large part, they feel misheard, misunderstood, and misrepresented within the international arena. External actors, therefore, need to better understand, centralize, and amplify Palestinian youth voices so as to better engage and address the vast asymmetries of power in which Palestinian youth are enmeshed. Palestinian youth, whether as second-class citizens within Israel or living in occupied or besieged territory in West Bank or Gaza, are angry, and understandably so. On the virtue of their identity and ethnicity, their human rights are systematically denied by the governing Israeli authorities. Their freedoms are routinely restricted, while Palestinian livelihoods and indeed their lives are methodically destroyed and dispossessed by a decades-long military occupation and governance system that is tantamount to apartheid. After years of documentation, Human Rights Watch has declared this system as containing systematic crimes against humanity. So in a research trip exploring emotional expression among young male Palestinian refugees, one young man, who I'll name Jamal as a pseudonym, told me that within this context, he often feels he could boom, explode, there's just so much pressure inside of me. Yet he said that when the Israeli soldiers enter my camp, as they often do, and take the youth and beat them, and do something to them that is bad, I feel a bad thing inside of me, but I can't do anything. I don't have a gun like him. I don't have anything. So when the soldiers come, I just sit in my home and wish they would be gone. I try not to think about them, because what can I do? They have the guns, they have the jeeps, they have a lot of things. What can I do? And yet the often unexpressed anger and emotion of Palestinian youth, for the large part, is vilified within the international arena. Images of stone-throwing kafia-clad Palestinian youth are heralded as proof that all Palestinians are supposedly terrorists, to whom the laws of the rest of humanity do not apply. Palestinian youth, of course, are aware of this. One young refugee said to me, if we throw a stone, we are the terrorists, but the Israeli soldiers have the guns, they have the tanks, they have the pilots. While another young man explained to me that he always feels like he needs to keep calm, even though he's angry all the time, because if not, they, and by which he means Israel, will use my anger against me. So anger is an energy. It has a physiological response. It needs to move. And that movement of energy is not always negative. It can be constructive. And it can even be releasing, especially within such a repressive and restrictive context in which the Palestinian youth survive. If not channeled, anger is corrosive. Research shows that unprocessed trauma, unprocessed anger has embodied consequences. And Halil, another young man, Sudaman, described to me as, it feels like when you start to give a balloon that much air, it feels like it's going to explode, and you just need to empty this pressure anywhere. So any intervention with Palestinian youth, therefore, I argue, needs to listen to and engage with this understandable anger at the inordinate pressures that they face living under military occupation. This cannot be sidestepped and it cannot be normalized. Palestinian youth won't let it be. So within this context, there are multiple community-based projects started and initiated by Palestinian youth through which they creatively express emotions surrounding the injustice in which they're living. Finding joy in Debka dance, articulating sorrow through community theatre, or in the case of my research, expressing anger through music. Jamal, who I referenced before, he told me that my music, it's the way that I empty what is inside of me. He said, you know, rap music is like an energy for me. I take my anger and I put it in a song. In his music, he said, I can say what I want, I can send my message and tell people that we are here, that we are living a hard life. While Hassan, another man, he works with young children to train children how to use music to express their feelings. So it might not be through music, but through whatever means, Palestinian youth like Jamal, they need to be given the space to say what I want. They're saying it already. External actors simply have to listen. They have to be given the space to tell their own stories and send their own messages in their own words. And this is what I endeavour to do in my work with the Emerging MENA initiative at IDS. So until the occupation is over and Palestinian human rights are realised, programmes and interventions with Palestinian youth cannot ignore or invisibilise their anger. To do so is just yet another form of repression, and any intervention with Palestinian youth needs to be focused on liberation. That's the most urgent need in Palestine today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Another thought-provoking contribution on forms of expression that many actors will need to reflect, pause, and think about how to engage with them. So now there is a moment for the audience to have a question or a contribution in reaction to these two provocations. I haven't seen anything in the chat yet, but perhaps there's someone who similarly has encountered forms of youth expression that are not according to the classic rule book of what participation looks like in an orderly fashion, organized meeting room, where most young people may not feel as comfortable to express themselves. So I'm just looking if there's anyone who'd like to share a contribution or a thought. There will be other opportunities later, and if not, we could move on to the next two provocations. Then I'll suggest we do that. And for that, I hand over to Tarila, who is going to introduce the next set of provocations, which will be about youth action. Tarila, please.
Thank you, Mayoke, for that. Thank you very much, Mayoke. I cannot thank myself, of course, because I've been the speaker. That will be too much, but I thank Chloe and Mayoke for the intervention in the first round. And we proceed to the second round. In this round, we are looking at youth actions. We focus on how we can learn from the bottom-up and local youth-driven initiatives. In this context, oftentimes we see youth action as fluid and informal in ways that they mobilize in ways that are often unrecognized by government actors and the donor communities. So they info in slums, in urban settlements that are considered to be slums, unmarked, undocumented, and in different ways. So when we recognize, it may still be a challenge, or when they are recognized, it may still be a challenge to connect them with other forms of actions. So how, for example, connecting informal and formal movements. We already see that with the NSAS. But also we need to reflect on how civil society and government actors can take these youth, engage in these actions, serious, support them, and where there's a mismatch, organize them in ways that produce the desired outcomes. For this, we will hear from Georgia Kadosi on gangs in Kenya and Sophia Shahab on Iraq. I will now hand over to Georgia.
Thank you very much, Tarila, and good afternoon, everyone. I want to talk about how some youths can exit networks of violence in Africa. Yeah, maybe I should wait for the screen sharing. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so how some youths can exit networks of violence in Africa. We have considered violent extremism in Tunisia and urban gangs in Kenya and focused on transition, that is a transition to normal, that is a very long, painful and fragile process. Youth engagement in violent extremism in the Sahel can result from the micro experiences of youth, and it relates to identity, belonging, and the role youth plays in the society. The tipping point is the moment when youth decide to join a violent extremist group. Maybe you can change the slide, please. Yeah, thank you. And the tipping point depends on individual factors linked to cognitive abilities and perception happiness in childhood. Parental absence, lack of exposure to people of different ethnicities and beliefs, and lack of education as well, can foster the youth's interest in extremist groups. Isolation in a difficult context affects a child's identity, sense of exclusion, and sense of belonging to other groups. So the tipping point also depends on social reasons, for instance, the discontent due to the neglect on the part of the government and low confidence in democratic institutions. Some of these factors also emerge in the urban gangs in Kenya. In Tunisia, we refer to the study done by the Maghreb Economic Forum on the links between exclusion of youth and their radicalization, and their inclusion and the radicalization. In particular, we focused on the meaning of inclusion for disengaged youths to value their experience. In the next slide, we can see what inclusion means to disengaged youth. Inclusion is education that shapes both theoretical and practical skills, an employment that is gainful and ethical, a civic engagement that protects social norms, political participation that is strict to basic participation at specific occasions, for instance, and social acceptance of their willingness to reintegrate. Finally, also the fact that one's private relationship with religion should not be subject to others' interpretation. Disengagement from violent extremist groups typically results from disillusionment and a change in priorities due to guilt, reaction to violence, or new friendships. In Tunisia, we must consider rehabilitation programs are critical for the high number of returnees. However, marginalization still contributes to violent extremism and insurgency. There is a need for a coordinated approach of reintegration of returnees and countering new radicalization. So the next slide shows instead the Nairobi case study. Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, is characterized by violent youth gangs that are a major problem, especially in slums. We studied the trajectory in and out these gangs of John Kimani, who lives in the slum village of Kambimoto. At the age of 13, he got engaged in gangs doing armed robbery, drug use, illegal business, and armed clash with the police. The next slide shows the model of Chabot-Ouimet that helped us understanding the relationship between three variables that increased the opportunities for John and eventually to engage in violent gangs. We have an unfavorable ecosystem of slums where youth are marginalized, poverty traps, unemployment, food insecurity, inequality in access to resources, lack of infrastructure and services, and unsafe space, among others, largely affect youth. According to John, Islam's youth have no future. So some of them end up investing in a gangster life to get some identity, group recognition, easy money, and possibility to support the family. This negative ecosystem fosters violence activators such as peer pressure, negative mentorship, need for money to survive, and self-protection against the police. Youths develop a culture of daily livelihoods and survival. Third, there is a wrong approach by the police and the judicial system that exacerbates violence. If these systems don't work to help the youths, distances with institutions increase as well as the sense of abandon and insatisfaction with the system. Police should not fight against youth, but listen to them. So the next slide shows that in slums, often very poor parents also lack time to guide children and lack information on what their children do. So engagement in violent gangs for children, for youth, happens gradually. There is a starting with more robbery for daily survival, then learning techniques to conduct armed missions, and eventually develop a criminal career and invest in it. Armed conflicts with police often affect the youth's lives to death. This is when John Kimani lost most fellow members and decided to change his life. But the transition posed three big challenges. Being accepted by the family and community required commitment to change behavior and engage with the community. Economic empowerment is the second challenge. Lack of easy money is hard to endure when one lacks food. John Kimani volunteered in construction work for the Kambimoto Slum Upgrading, a community-led initiative that eventually paid back with support. Third, the risk of backsliding. Lack of money is a strong pressure that go back to work with gangs. Keeping the decision of exiting requires strength, creativity in finding ways to earn one's living, and support from the community. So in the next slide, we see that how John managed to get engaged in community upgrading projects and participated in construction works. He was supported by community members, NGOs, and associations assisting the youths, and mentors. Being an expert of the gang context, knowing of gangs' language and dressing and behavior codes allowed him to develop mentorship programs. Finally, we want to pose three main questions to conclude this presentation. One is, can we identify the tilting point of commitment to going back to normal life? What are the individual and social factors that can lead to the changeover? Second is, how do previous engagement in violence helps back to counter other youth's engagement? This expertise must be recognized, valued, and used in systematic ways by public programs. What skills are required? What role do ex-gang members can play on the field? Finally, the third question is, how can we capitalize on knowledge from youths who exited violent networks? We should not let them alone. Who are the main actors who can help in doing this, and what resources are necessary? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgia. I will now hand over to Sophia, who will speak on how young people contribute to preserving heritage in Iraq. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Torella, and good afternoon, everyone. Within this short presentation, I'm going to be focusing on how heritage has been utilized by young people as part of forward-looking strategies to secure the future of their communities, and what we can learn from them in terms of policy and practice through these interventions that they've staged. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I'd like to take you to the town of Bashirkha in northern Iraq between Mosul and the Kurdistan border. Through the accounts of Yazidi youth from the town, I was able to explore how some of the young people of Bashirkha employed their heritage as a means of resistance, resilience, and peace in the aftermath of Daesh. On the next slide, we can see how the importance of the shrines and churches for the Yazidi and Christian communities in Bashirkha meant that they were among the very first buildings to be rehabilitated after the liberation from Daesh. As a result, teams of about 18 young people, aged between 12 and 30 years old, contributed 5,000 Iraqi dinar each, which is approximately $3 of their own money, to buy the tools and hire a minivan to transport them to Bashirkha each weekend. There they worked over the course of 1 month to restore the Church of the Virgin Mary. This served as a means to assert their presence and as a public statement that they had not been defeated. It also functioned to restore the bonds between the peoples of the town as they worked together in its rehabilitation and joined in celebrating religious rites and festivals. The next slide, please. The rehabilitation of heritage in Bashirkha, most notably the restoration of the church, positioned youth as active agents in the future of their communities. Their heritage was not only representative of their past and the preserve of elites and elders, but was used by young people as a means of securing their future within the town and as ethno-religious minorities in Iraq. Some of the older Yazidis I spoke to lamented that the cultural changes that saw Yazidi youth wearing the colour blue, which is typically associated with being the colour of the heavens and therefore not usually worn by Yazidi communities, and also of shaving their beards. However, young people's involvement in the rehabilitation of the shrines and churches and their participation in festivals emphasized their role as key stakeholders in the heritage of their communities. This gave them ownership over their heritage through the ability to choose which heritage they wanted to maintain and how they wanted to engage with it. The agency of the youth I spoke with was reinforced in and through the stories they chose to share with me and through their participation in my research itself. This was also a form of political activism through which they could shape perceptions and responses. Talking about their heritage was a form of preservation that resisted the tangible destruction undertaken by Daesh, as well as what those I spoke to saw as attempts by Arab and Kurdish groups to lay claim to their town. As a result, it was a way for these youth to assert narrative control as they took on diplomatic roles in representing and speaking to me on behalf of their communities. Those I spoke to all described an increased distrust of Muslim communities resulting from the targeted persecution they faced under Daesh. In emphasizing the bonds between Christians and Yazidis in Bashirkha and focusing on the heritage of these communities, there was therefore also a noticeable practice of exclusion. This reconfigured the boundaries of Bashirkha with regards to those who were seen to belong and overrode histories of collaboration between different groups. This meant that to create a sense of security and stability, Muslim populations were repositioned as strangers and a threat to the social and religious life of the town. While many peace-building initiatives work to promote dialogue between young people from different communities, there also needs to be a recognition of where and how these youth are situating themselves in order to feel an embodied sense of security and everyday peace as they seek to reorientate themselves in the aftermath of mass atrocity. There was a resistance to formal structures and institutions, such as NGO operations, as well as a distrust of Iraqi and Kurdish governments and their forces. This led those I worked with to privilege and emphasize internal mechanisms and structures with minimal external intervention. They described how Bashirkha and the Yazidi community had been abandoned by governments and international actors. There was therefore a deep-seated distrust of formal political structures, which they saw as ignoring their needs and preventing them from mobilizing to benefit their community. For example, the young people were only able to rehabilitate one of the churches within the town, as they could not obtain permissions from church authorities to help restore the others. This was because there were questions around the involvement of UNESCO or other such formal institutions. This opposed youth priorities in enabling community cohesion through the reclamation of public spaces and intangible heritage practices. As a result, it is not enough to foster youth leadership without creating enabling environments by removing the structural barriers that prevent their voices from being heard and heeded, and their ability to enact for themselves the changes they wish to see in society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just go straight to one question that has been asked by Jane Abubakar. The question is there any evidence, we thank the panelists, of course, is there any evidence of persecution of those using music to promote youth issues by political leaders? I will keep this open to both panels that we've had, Sophia and Georgia, but also the panel that I spoke in, Chloe. Is there any evidence that people using music to express themselves were persecuted by the government? And so, for example, did music help in the slum settlements of Kenya, or in the case of heritage preservation in Iraq or Palestine?
Thank you, Terila. Just to answer, I have no evidence of that. I have not done studies specifically about music, so I cannot respond to that specifically, but I don't know about. Thanks.
Sophia?
So music as a form of heritage and intangible heritage, especially linked to different societies in Iraq, is really important. For example, in Bashirkha itself, there are very specific dubkes, so dances and the music that accompanies them for the Yazidi community there that are, very much part of that community and that community's identity. So there's very much a sense in the persecution of the Yazidis and the cultural genocide enacted by Daesh that they were trying to eradicate the entire culture, including the music and the dances from the town, by doing away with tangible heritage and then also the communities who practice that heritage. But from formal political institutions at the moment, there isn't that persecution, but from armed opposition groups, there certainly has been, and in the past as well under the Saddam Hussein regime, definitely a repression of cultural heritage in the form of music and dances, as well as the tangible side. Chloe, I think you might have something to add on.
Thank you very much. I think we're out of time, but I will let Chloe speak for 30 seconds.
30 seconds, oh my goodness, go. Hi, I guess, well, I was also looking at the question above, which also related around kind of how and in what ways about how youth use music to create alternative spaces and publics and how that subverts authoritarian authority. So I might answer that and then follow on to this question because it's related. So the first question, in terms of how and in what ways is popular music used to freely express themselves, I think just in terms of what I was saying about in a Palestinian context, there's that sense of that cathartic mechanism. So how that relates to the question of suppression and whether it's been suppressed. Palestinian youth expressions are suppressed in any way by Israeli forces, whether they're walking to school, whether they're throwing a stone at a checkpoint, or whether they're rapping. So in some sense, it doesn't matter what they're doing, they will be suppressed by the military occupation. So, and then that follows on to the second part of the question from Simbarashe, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, around how are youth subverting authoritarian authority. And in Palestinian rap, what's really interesting is, there's some really good work by an anthropologist called Julie Petit around how Palestinians would kind of appropriate their suffering. So being arrested to some extent becomes a little bit like a rite of passage into particularly masculinity, but into adulthood, because it is so inevitable, because it will happen. So if you've been arrested, then you're becoming an adult now. That narrative has changed since the Intifada, since the first Intifada, which was when she was writing, which is in the early 90s. And now you can kind of see that more through forms of expression. So for example, in Palestinian rap, you'll see young men, instead of kind of posturing in front of cars or whatever, they're posturing in front of the wall or in front of a checkpoint. So in that sense, there's a sense of kind of appropriating that oppression and subverting it into a kind of message of like brandishing the scars of the suffering that they face. And that's all very tied in with gender, which I could talk about for ages, and I'm not going to because
I'll have to, thanks so much, Chloe. I'll have to stop you there. Thanks, Tadila, for moderating this second round of provocations. We've seen more questions coming in into the chat. Please also hold them for the breakout rooms. There was a good question from Wessel, I think, about how to support youth. That's going to be in the breakout rooms very soon, also with these speakers. And it sounds like good listening may need you to listen to more music, if I could get this all correctly, and taking the pulse of the street. What is being sensed and felt, and how is it expressed? Okay, we're moving on to the third and last round of provocations before we go into the breakout rooms. And this is about aligning with youth. So how can one align with the way young people are expressing themselves? And of course, there is already some knowledge on strategies for creating spaces for youth engagement and aligning with youth voices. Some young organizations have experience creating participation. They happen in very politicized spaces. We need to connect to the debates of civic space, of repression, dynamics of violence and repression, because youth engagement doesn't just happen in neutral spaces. There is the fear of repercussions. People don't dare to voice out directly to state actors. So we'll now hear from Zimbabwe, people who have direct experience with doing this, supporting youth spaces and actions. By Desmond and then Grace. Desmond, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, of course, as you talk about aligning with the youth, I'll just pick up from where Roswitha, or a colleague of mine, left off when she gave the opening remarks, which is the work that we've done supported by the IDRC around strengthening youth civic engagement. So I'll share a bit of our experiences as an organization, as the Youth Empowerment and Transformation Trust, and how we've interacted with the issues of aligning with the youth. So as part of this support we've got, we have done a study that looked specifically on the factors that aid or impede young women and young men's participation in civic and democratic processes. And we also tried to understand a bit more on how policymakers and government actors at both the local and the national level can create more inclusive spaces and platforms, as well as opportunities for the contribution of the youth, because there has been a significantly huge gap in terms of the contribution of youth in the broader democratic processes of Zimbabwe. And among the findings, we discovered also that there's alarmingly low levels of constitutional awareness among the youths. There's also one of the biggest issues that was cited is the issue of intimidation and potential political violence, as well as harassment, that are kind of key factors that keep young people away from participating. And this was specifically pointed at how young people engage or interact with political parties. And also, maybe lastly, I'll just mention the fact that there's also this feeling from youth that there's a negative attitude towards youth participation in civic and democratic processes. The most significant submission was to say that when they share input, it is not taken on board. This is the feeling that comes from young people themselves. So what have we done as yet to sort of bridge this gap and also as solutions to these challenges? We have also done a lot of process facilitation. I'll give an example of one of the most recent interventions, which we did at provincial level, was interaction between youth and what is called the COVID-19 Provincial Task Force. So with regards to COVID-19, a lot of information was not filtering down to communities, to our society, and also to young people specifically. And we took it upon ourselves to create these safe spaces so that young people can interface with duty bearers, what we call duty bearers, and express themselves, and also to ask the key and critical questions. So this is one such space that we created and facilitated. We also have a specifically strong focus on young women development, and as a result, we have annual young women summits where we bring young women together as a collective to interact as well with officials from, be it the Gender Commission, be it from the Ministry of Women Affairs, the Ministry of Youth, so that they express themselves in a space that they feel is easy for them to relate. And as a result, we've actually seen an increase in interactions between, so to speak, the state and the youth. And this has been really quite an interesting adventure that we've taken on. We've also been facilitating what we call budget tracking or youth-friendly budget making processes, where we bring young people together. We tell them about the national budget. We ask them for their input, and we bring together the portfolio committee from Parliament that works on creating the national budget. And then they have these interactions and give points of clarification to the youth. And I think maybe in closing, what I would want to say is that we've also found that the use of informal spaces, to reach out to youth, has also kind of been something that hasn't been used at a national level, and it's something that we've tried and tested ourselves. We've used what we call creative activism through edutainment and the use of art, the use of music. Someone spoke about it in the previous previous session. And so these have been kind of ways to provoke and to initiate dialogue and debate amongst the youth themselves, but also as a platform to express their opinions to duty bearers. So for now, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Desmond. Thanks for that example and of the experience of working directly with young people. Grace, can I invite you to share your thoughts?
Yes,
please be mindful of the time. Thanks, Grace.
Everybody. Alrighty. So my name is Grace Rimbo-Chirenge, and I work with Accountability Lab Zimbabwe. And just as an introduction, Zimbabwe is broadly a repressive society where we saw a military government come into power in November 2017. So there's quite a lot of closing of civic space with unlawful arrests, arbitrary detentions, and curtailing of fundamental freedoms like freedoms of speech, expression, and association. And what we seek, and you find that there's a lot of lethargy and negativity amongst the young people in Zimbabwe because of what they face. And what we seek to do as Accountability Lab Zimbabwe is we use something called a positive deviance approach, where we acknowledge that in as much as there's so much drama and chaos, something does work, and we start from there. And I'll give an example of two critical projects that we work on. We work with a project called Arts for Change with young people, where we use film and music to talk about the issues that young people are facing, and also share an understanding of what is going on and stimulate social consciousness around what young people are facing, in the hope that they will recognize where the gaps are and begin to hold governments accountable. One of the, and we've done that, and we're on our second year doing that, and it's been quite informative and quite interesting to see how young people can actually express themselves very well and cite the issues that affect them. The second one is around what we call civic action teams, where we work with young people and communities and young people in particular to raise the issues that are going on in society. But more than that, we actually work with the young people within those communities to also to hold government accountable. So we bring in different and then one of the most exciting ones in one of the local communities that we work in, we saw that the city council that's responsible for refuse collection was actually sued by the Environmental Management Agency to make sure that they continue to some of the joys that we experience, but also to say that these safe spaces where young people can participate offer a space of for interaction between the service providers and the young people, in a space that is safe and a space that is not accusatory, but a space where people can have conversations and have robust conversations for the betterment of the communities. So these have been some of the experiences that we witness as Accountability Lab. In closing this up, it's critical to note that young people, when given the opportunity to participate, when the spaces are there, they will definitely show up and begin to demand for accountability from the respective leaders. And we've seen this happen, and it's been absolutely phenomenal to see the changes that happen within communities that young people lead. And it also facilitates for this conversation that comes from the young people themselves and goes up to the leaders that work within the respective communities. I hope this will stimulate conversation and thought around the possibilities of working with young people and ensuring that the whole lead is accountable. Over to you, Mayoke. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks so much, Grace. So we hear concrete issues, local issues, creating safe spaces, equipping young people, like in those safe spaces, they build civic skills to then later on engage in accountability processes with power holders. So those are some of the, and then the creative methodologies that came out in several presentations as a low threshold, stepping stone for young people to start engaging. All right, thanks so much for everyone. We're moving on to a breakout room. In a moment, you will see two options at the bottom of your screen. There's one group called Exiting Violent Traps, and one group is called Youth Participation. So the Exiting Violent Traps is the work that Georgia presented. What can we learn about how young people take action to leave violent groups? The other one on youth participation is not concentrated on armed groups, but governance processes. You'll have until 40 minutes past the hour, then we come back into plenary. And so that the audience has a few more moments, opportunities to share their examples of how they have been supporting young people. All right, let's open the rooms. You can choose yourself, and you're coming back 40 minutes past the hour.
Opening the rooms.
We would like to hear, especially from the audience, You need to join a breakout.
I'm gonna look at hands up if people from the audience also have experience.
It's straightforward. You see it appearing on your screen because you haven't joined and you were supposed to chair a group.
I don't see the link. Is it in the chat box?
No, it appears on your screen. And then you have the option to choose room 1 or room 2.
Okay, so we see different people have joined now, not just the speakers. Is there anyone, and if you can, I only see black names and stuff, so if you don't mind opening your camera, then it will be a bit easier to have a discussion here. I'd love to know which other people have experience supporting youth participation, or are there other examples of or other questions? Then I'd love to hear from others. There's Pierre, Matthew, Phoebe, Ivo, Charlotte.
I'm gonna put you in a room.
Okay, I didn't receive the message they sent. I don't know.
No, I think it's okay. Let me.
Okay, so Rita is here now. Pierre, hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Would love to hear your reflections of what you've heard, or maybe your own experience. And also, I'm going to post a link to a Padlet in the chat where people, if you can post ideas or links that we can bring in other knowledge together. So that's a virtual board. But Pierre, go ahead. What would you like to share?
I'd like to share my experience as candidate for the organization international learn, and we were mainly focusing on the problematic of the violence in Princeton, so not specifically for the violence, but one of the points that was underlined during the study that we were doing just before starting the programming is that the marginalization was that being out of the power
Hello. Hi. Very sorry, Sophia. Sorry about that.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I think everyone has come back into. I'm sorry if anyone was cut half sentence. This with this breakout room business. That's just how it is. I do hope it was an opportunity to have a bit more interaction and that we got to hear some reflections, insights from other people in the audience. Thanks for that. Tarila, can I ask you to report back a top level insight from your breakout room on exiting violent groups?
Thank you very much, Mayoke. I will say that it was we didn't have a lot of time because the discussion was about to get very exciting, and then we were called back. However, one issue that I think could summarize the discussions is the fact that researchers and speakers see these at both a macro level, the society, the state, and the issues that are external to the individual, that are embedded in the society, but also see that these are factors that determine how people exit violent groups, but also that there are individual micro experiences, including family issues, generational trauma, youth experience with unemployment, and different factors that are limited to the individual. So therefore, in thinking about exiting violent groups, we think not just on programmatic terms, but to divide this into a macro societal issues and the micro individual issues. And we could say about a meso, something in between, but in our discussions, when we are to summarize, we look at on the left and the right, which is macro and micro. And these forms of circle of violence that requires the individual to exit, and therefore to exit this circle of violence, that we start to address these issues. And as Marie and some colleagues pointed out, that some of the programs actually reinforce this circle of violence. That some of the programs that we have seen do reinforce the circle of violence in African countries or in other parts of the world. And therefore, we need to start thinking differently to end this circle of violence. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. I was in the other breakout room on participation, how to support participation, and some insights were shared about the deep knowledge needed about local power dynamics, local context, creating safe spaces for youth and reaching youth through the right channels like social media, like arts, popular culture, and then putting in place well thought through mechanisms for addressing political risk in these kind of places. And that needs to be part of all of these discussions too. So on that note, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation. Thanks so much for joining this panel. Thanks to the conference organizers for having us. Please do stay in touch to continue to conversation so that this wasn't just a one-off. My email is in the chat. If you want to connect to any of the researchers, I will put you in touch. And I hope to see you in person or in other online activities in the near future. Thanks, everyone. And a big clap of hands to yourselves.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.